Our first panel has an intentional title, and let me read it to you. The Greatest Flaw: How Quality-Adjusted Life Years Promote Ethical Problems and Impede Access to Therapies and Drug Innovation. So what does all that mean? And let me break it down for you very clearly. Since 2018, AAKP has led in the kidney community in our fight against quality-adjusted life years. And essentially, what are these? These are measures that are used by payers to make an assessment about new treatments and innovations that are important to you, the kidney patient community. The very innovations that we have fought for so long, for so many decades, are being subject to economic measures and assessment measures that basically put less value on the treatments that extend the lives of those who live with chronic diseases and severe illnesses, like kidney disease. The reason why this is critically important is because after all of the efforts that we undertake to advance innovation and to raise patient insights and patient lived experience as valuable data, there's actually an effort out there to devalue all that and to basically use a rudimentary economic analysis that says in order to cover a new drug, we're going to use something that adjusts the value of that new therapy based on the people that it's going to go to because of their health conditions. Now, at the face of it, we understand that's discriminatory. The practical issue is, after all of these efforts, this is actually one of the greatest barriers in our view to ongoing innovation in kidney medicine, especially therapies that are designed to slow kidney disease and to make certain that kidneys don't fail. You can think about what the future implications are. As we have new therapies that come forward, or things like artificial organs, this poses a severe threat. And so it's best to take it on now. And again, since 2018, we've led this fight in the kidney community, but we are surrounded by allies of over 150 organizations, patient organizations, disability rights organizations, industry partners, because they also understand this is a huge access issue. The blowback against quality-adjusted life years has been so significant that in the House of Representatives, Kathy McMorris Rodgers, representative from Washington State, entered legislation this year called H.R. 485, and you can see it on our platform here. And that bill is titled Protecting Healthcare for All Patients Act. We'll hear about that in this session because after years of opposition at the grassroots level, Representative Kathy McMorris Rodgers had the courage to go ahead and introduce legislation and to bring around leaders in the Senate and in the House to start talking about this issue and bringing it into the national mainstream. You have great folks like Senator Tim Scott, Senator Grassley, Senator Barrasso, and others that are raising this issue of great concern because if these are applied in federal programs, that can impact you, your health, and your future access to drugs. So in our panel today, we'll go ahead and start with a longtime ally of AAKP, and that's Josie Cooper. And Josie serves as the executive director of the Alliance for Patient Access, a very good friend of ours. And I'll toss it over to Josie and have her talk about some of the efforts that the Alliance has undertaken on this issue and in partnership with us. Hey, Josie, good morning, and thank you.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having us. And we just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our work and the importance of this issue. As Paul said, the Alliance for Patient Access is a longtime partner of the American Association of Kidney Patients. AfPA, as we call it, is a national nonprofit advocacy group that is dedicated to promoting policies that will support patient-centered care and allow for patient access to appropriate FDA-approved therapies. So we work to empower healthcare providers in particular, but also allied patient advocates and other organizations to engage in policy advocacy. And so we do this by recruiting, training up, mobilizing advocates on issues related to patient access and patient-centered care. And we work broadly across a number of different disease areas, but what all of our work has in common is this focus on making sure that if you're a patient, you can access the type of care that you and your clinician have worked together to determine is best for you. So we spend a lot of our time at AfPA on insurance barriers, utilization management tools, for instance, things like prior authorization that require patients and providers to do a lot of paperwork before they can get access to the care that they think is most appropriate. We work on issues around cost sharing, things that insurers can do to price insured patients out of their medication. You're always looking for policy opportunities to limit those barriers to make sure that if you're a patient, you can access care quickly and without barriers. There has been, as Paul has said, tremendous innovation, but with that innovation has come the bad news of more barriers. And what's interesting about all the work that we do at AfPA is that a lot of it comes down to these questions of value. How are insurers, how are policymakers placing value on innovation? And measures like the QALY are so challenging because they take a one-size-fits-all approach. So it's kind of this metric determined by health economists that measures, what is the cost effectiveness of this medication. And frequently insurers will use that determination to put into place barriers like the ones I've mentioned: step therapy, prior authorization, cost sharing tools. And so addressing the QALY head on is really important in trying to mitigate the barriers that we see at an insurance level. And so at the Alliance for Patient Access, we spend a lot of our time talking about value, a lot of our time talking about the QALY, whether that's educating patients and physicians on how they can engage, whether that's educating policymakers on the importance of addressing this, or educating the public on what they need to know about these types of measures. And so I'm happy to talk more about some of the specific work that we're doing. But Paul, just really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you being here, Josie, and we'll get to some questions here in a minute. Our next guest that I'd like to introduce is another longtime partner of ours, the Alliance for Aging Research. And today we have with us Adina Lasser, who's the manager of public policy. And in Adina's portfolio is this very issue of quality adjusted life years, and in particular, one organization that works to champion those, and that along with the Alliance for Aging Research, we have worked against. And Adina, I'd go ahead and ask you to give some background on the Alliance and the work that you're doing. And thank you in advance for the longtime partnership that we've had with you folks as well. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you so much for having me today and for this opportunity. We really appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about the work that we've been doing at the Alliance. So as Paul mentioned, my name is Adina Lasser. I am the Public Policy Manager at the Alliance for Aging Research. The Alliance is the leading nonprofit organization dedicated to accelerating the pace of both scientific discoveries and their application to improve the sort of universal experience of aging and health. And so we want to help people live longer, happier, more productive lives and kind of reduce healthcare costs over the long term. And so because of this, we've been engaged in the value assessment space for a long time. And Paul mentioned that we have a project dedicated to fighting, a group called the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, or maybe fightingism, but just pointing out the flaws in the sort of methodologies used by the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review. And they're a group of health economists that are really pushing for QALYs and things like the quality adjusted life year and a couple of other discriminatory metrics like the equal value of life years gained and to be used more in the United States. And people like ICER, groups like ICER will talk about how the QALY, is a foregone conclusion. The QALY is necessary when evaluating how much something costs. And that's just not the case. And it hasn't been used in the United States before. This is a new sort of effort and method that they're pushing on our system. And it's not worthwhile. And I think that's why we need to push back. So I'm really excited we're all gathered here today to talk about HR 485, the Protecting Healthcare for All Patients Act of 2023. We're thrilled as the Alliance to see positive momentum with HR 485 in this Congress. This bill represents a significant step towards addressing the discriminatory nature of the QALYs and ensuring fairer assessments are used that consider the needs of all unique patient populations, including older adults and kidney patients. So I'm so excited that we're all talking about this today. Why does this matter? I think that Paul and Josie have both done a really good job of talking about how this really all comes back to patient access to care. When payers like Medicare use these values, they're deciding if they're going to provide coverage for a certain treatment or test. And these discriminatory methodologies undervalue treatments for different kinds of patients, especially for older patients, people with disabilities, anyone that doesn't fit under their definition of an average patient. And so banning QALYs and other discriminatory metrics like the EVLYG will help to stop this problem. Our work at the Alliance revolves around meaningfully engaging with these issues by educating grassroots advocates, like hopefully the people on this call, on why this matters, not just to sort of, the people who work on, health economics, but why this matters every day to patients, and why engaging can be so important. We also create videos for that. And then we also create reports that sort of look at the underlying data there. It's just important to remember that what we're fighting for here is patient access to care, even when that care is new or innovative or might be valued differently by your doctor than it is by you. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Adina. And we'll come back and talk about the video that you've made available to us here in a second. Our next speaker is Alvin Lee, and Alvin serves as the Vice President of Vera Therapeutics. And the reason why we've asked Alvin to be on here is because you've heard about how quality-adjusted life years can impact patients, but I also want folks to understand exactly how they impact industry and innovation. And Alvin, why don't you go ahead and kind of lay that out for our folks that are watching this morning?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul, and AAKP for having me. My name is Alvin. I'm over at Vera Therapeutics, which is a biotechnology company based near San Francisco. We're developing new medicines for patients with kidney disease, and this is a topic near and dear to our hearts. We have multiple teammates at the company who have personally donated kidneys to family members with kidney diseases, and our lead molecule is called atacicept, which is a B-cell immunomodulator that we believe targets the source of disease for IgA nephropathy. And we just presented the results of our phase 2 trial last month, and we initiated our pivotal phase 3 trial last month as well. IgA nephropathy may be a good example for this topic. It is a rare kidney disease in which many patients experience progressive decline, eventually leading to dialysis or transplantation. I think while we acknowledge the important work that governments and payers around the world do to evaluate new medicines, there can be a downside to QALY as one particular measure when you try to assign a numerical value to things like mobility, pain, mental health, and the ability to do typical activities. In IgA nephropathy, patients are oftentimes diagnosed in their 20s and 30s. These patients are actually oftentimes asymptomatic on the outside. They may feel physically fine and be able to walk around while their kidneys are being slowly damaged in a significant way. And so over-indexing on QALY can have ramifications when speaking with payers, with governments around the world. This is an area that we monitor on our side, particularly not only in the United States, but around the world. So in Europe, QALY can be a challenging measure with different government bodies when trying to explain a disease like IgA nephropathy. And so there, for arguments about saving the kidney, intervening early with newer therapeutics, this can be a more challenging argument when you have measures like QALY that do not fully capture the totality of patient experience. So that's our perspective from a company developing new innovative medicines.
Thank you very much, Al. And we'll come back to you here in a second, because I think this issue of where patients and industry align, especially in the decade of the kidney, as Ed Hickey talked about, which we launched in 2019, this is a very promising and golden time for new medicines and new devices in the kidney space after decades of stagnation. And I think the linkage there is a natural linkage. Next, we'll move on to Richard Knight, who's our immediate past president and a nationally recognized champion for civil rights, for patient care choice, and for making certain that patients have a voice at the table. And Richard, what I want to do is kind of throw this out to you. given the fact that for 10 years you've worked with FDA and NIH to elevate patient insights and lived experiences at the table, it's almost now a juxtaposition against some of these efforts that are being done that devalue patients. And I wanted you to kind of talk about AAKP's work in this area and perspective on it as an individual and also as a national advocacy leader.
Thanks, Paul. I'm happy to do so. And I do want to say that, as usual, AAKP has done a great job in pulling together this policy summit. Yes, I am the past president, but certainly a longtime patient and just someone out there who has the interests of our regular citizens, older folks, people with disabilities, and our fellow kidney patients. And I want to emphasize this. The beginning point of any strategy is looking at data. And there is just an overload of data that is out there and is available. And one of the things that happens is that people will use information to come to a conclusion. And one of the challenges, and AAKP has been on the forefront because we have been sitting at the table within many of these organizations, and we strongly emphasize to them that the status quo is not acceptable. And if you want us at the table and you want input from the patients, then we need to break down some of these concepts that you're talking about and looking at the fallacy of them. And if you want to talk about patient-centered outcomes, we need to make some changes. And QALYs is a good example. For example, we've long noted that it's great that we have innovations. That which Alvin just talked about, the Vera Therapeutics, is a great innovation. It's great that we have new medical devices that come to the table. However, if we cannot get them paid for, then that more or less makes it a moot point if patients can't get access to them, or, as Josie talked about, if barriers are put in the way so that by the time you get access, in the case of kidney disease, it has gone further along the way towards losing the use of your kidneys. And of course, with each individual chronic disease or disability, there's a lot of different factors that come into play. So what we have done as an organization, with the concept of, or with the decade of the kidney, we've really tried to bring everyone into our effort, because without the numbers, without the focus and the support of the patient community, as individuals, we don't have the same strength and voice. So I think that we've done a great job, and we can talk about and have these conversations, but on our agenda, we have some steps down there to take action. I want everyone who's listening to take action and follow the information that's down there. It's educational. It's going to give you some idea as to what to do. And I hate to put myself in that category as one of the older individuals on here, but the value that we place on older individuals that ICER does through this process is lower. The value on individuals on their life with disabilities is lower. And the question is who is making these determinations? And yes, we can quantify things as they do, but then there's a qualitative aspect, the contribution to society, the return to work. There's some fundamental flaws, as the group has pointed out. But just to reemphasize, there's some ethical considerations, valuing one life over another. Then there's some methodological and theoretical assumptions that are made that we take exception to. And then, of course, there's just the context of disease. I love it when people do statistics and they use composite numbers. Well, each of us are an individual, and we really can't be put into a composite number for the convenience of coming up with a calculation. And I think it was Alvin who mentioned globally, many other countries use a central body to put price or to limit budgets. And that is what the ICER, through this approach, because they have some proprietary formulas that they use, it ends up putting a restriction on healthcare budgets. And as we've seen in other parts of the world where we have a budget for a certain treatment, a certain medication, and once that budget runs out, we'll have to wait to the next period. This is what we are trying to avoid. And I'll make one last statement, because what is coming at us very rapidly now is artificial intelligence. And again, we have been at the forefront of that, working with the FDA, not accepting certain underlying assumptions, because one of the things that can be misleading with the use of artificial intelligence is the built-in bias that is used in making the models up and the underlying assumptions. So once that begins to take place, people will assume that there's a level of accuracy and correctness in projections that are made. So we want to be on the forefront, as Josie said, and several of the other presenters have said. We want to be on the forefront of the issue as to where we are now, and we appreciate our allies working with us so that we can support the HR 485 it is, and we can also continue to put the pressure on the legislators so that our voices are heard, and we can make it clear that the status quo is unacceptable. We want these new innovations, and we just don't want the innovations. We want access to them. So I'll turn it back to you, Paul, and certainly look forward to the rest of the conversation here.
I appreciate it, Richard. And for those that are watching to understand, Richard is a veteran of Capitol Hill, and he is also an MBA, and he teaches business. And so one of the pleasures at AAKP is that we've had a leadership team over the years that has been able to go into congressional meetings, executive branch meetings, and with folks like Richard Knight, as the president of AAKP, sit down at the table and look at a bunch of data that people are pushing forward, analyze it very quickly, and come back and ask the core question of, does this advance the patient interest or not? Because based on the data we're looking at, the patient voice is not there. Richard Knight did this in 2018 when we keyed off on the issue of quality adjusted life years at our first policy summit, and for a very good reason, because the data that was being presented to us by ICER and others did not reflect the lived experiences and the unique patient insights that folks like us in the kidney community have. We are the experts in our disease. And if you turn to ICER and ask them, sitting up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as health economists, they actually think they're the experts on what we should have access to. But on the point that Richard was just raising here about older populations, let me go back over to Adina. And Adina, I know that you've been tracking very, very closely what these measures could look like in Medicare programs and alternative measures. And that's one of the things I want to find out is how is this effort evolving in trying to use these types of things within the Medicare program and other U.S. programs?
Thank you so much for the question. I think that's a really relevant point that we need to be making. So I think the most major place that this is showing up in Medicare is actually in Medicare's relatively new ability to negotiate directly with manufacturers on the price of what they're willing to pay for drugs and therapeutics and other kind of forms of care. And so that was passed in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. And Medicare is now trying to figure out and trying to understand how they're going to negotiate kind of the price of drugs. And how they're going to do that is they're going to set what they call a maximum fair price. And so it's in that sort of underlying methodology that they use to set the maximum fair price that we're looking. And luckily they have agreed already that they're not going to use the QALY, but they've also specifically mentioned that they are looking to use other discriminatory metrics, or metrics that we like to say have the same discriminatory lineage as the QALY, something like the equal value of life years gained metric. And what that has to do with HR 485 is that there is some opposition on the Hill to passing this bill because, especially Democrats are really concerned that this bill directly goes after Medicare's direct negotiation provision, which is something that they pushed really hard for. And so it's important when we're doing our advocacy here to make sure that they know that this bill actually is not going to change anything. It does not come after the direct negotiation process. Medicare has said in that process that they're not going to use QALYs, and so this bill really won't have an impact on that. But it is important that we keep an eye out on what they are using, even if it's not the QALY. The EVLYG is a metric that it only looks at how much how much time a medication extends. And so if the medication doesn't give you, more time, it automatically is going to value someone who's younger versus somebody who's older, simply because of how many more years they have left to live. And so that does take out the sort of one of the major issues we have with the QALY, which is, quality to who is the question that we're asking. Is it quality to patients? Is it quality to the system? It does deal with that issue, but it still doesn't give people a fair shot at access to the care that they need. And so there's a lot of ways that this is showing up in Medicare and the federal government, but I think that's one that's top of mind for a lot of people.
I appreciate you raising that, Adina, because as our viewers know, the United States government spends over $100 billion a year on kidney care and over $30 billion alone on dialysis care. So that's one of the reasons why we've been such strong champions for innovation, because we know, as Richard said, we can challenge the status quo and bring in new innovations that extend life. But if we're taking suddenly a policy view in the United States that extending the lives of individuals and those treatments have less value, that's a completely different ballgame and a serious threat to kidney patients, because our history with the Medicare program goes back 50 years. Kidney disease is the only disease that has its own entitlement program. And if you start to introduce these measures into that, you can see what the implications are long-term to our efforts to try to get new therapies in to delay kidney disease and stop kidney failure. I want to go over to Josie and ask Josie this. Given your background in a lot of the grassroots activities that you've done, how significant is it for the patient community, including kidney patients, older patients, the disabled, to actually now have a piece of legislation to focus efforts on in Washington when you're working and communicating with folks?
Absolutely. I think that this is really significant to have a bill that we can all rally behind. I think you laid out nicely, and others on the panel have, that this is an issue that impacts multiple disease communities. This impacts kidney patients, but it impacts those who are older. This impacts the disability community. This impacts the chronic disease community. These measures are impacting us, whether we see it, or not. And so, we have to speak up. And what's fantastic here is that there is a bill that provides us the opportunity to get behind. This is a bill that would have significant impacts in limiting the use of the QALY and ensuring that patients can access the care that they need. And so it is really, really important that Congress hears from patients, hears from caregivers, hears from physicians, hears from advocacy groups on what this type of legislation, what this legislation in particular could do for you, could do for your health, could do for future innovation. The benefits of this will be significant in ensuring that we take a more holistic look at value and the value of innovation, and also that we ensure that, as these innovative therapies come to market, that patients are not dealing with these insurance barriers that are derived from narrow definitions of value. And so we would just really encourage from our perspective at AfPA for folks to get engaged here, tell your story, talk about how, what innovation means to you and how important it is, because policymakers need to hear from the broad community in order to get behind this legislation. So I think that's our perspective, but I think others probably have various perspectives as well.
Thanks, Josie. And let me go over to Alvin. And so, Al, when you're taking a look at this issue, and when you work, Al, so closely with advocacy organizations to understand what their unique needs are, if it's in rare disease, kidney diseases, when you're in that space and you're listening to patients and trying to deliver as a company, what are some of the practical issues that you look at long range, that if something like this were to be introduced, this factor, what does it mean to your product pipeline? What does it mean to investors in the space? And what does it mean to companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is critically important that patients are valued. And one reason that QALY may be undervaluing patients, again, is because some disease states have patients, like in our case with IgA nephropathy, where these patients are mobile, they may be outwardly asymptomatic, and so when showing their case with payers and governments, it could be possible that they are undervalued, which would impact overall access to patients. And I think one thing that I would speak to from my experiences with our close friends at the IgAN Foundation is just how tragic the disease is treated in general, and it may be a function of this access that is happening. There are too many patients out there that are experiencing progressive decline in their condition, where their physician may not be treating the disease as urgently as they should, where new therapeutics are not being used, where patients are being recycled with old historical supportive care. And so, these all may be intertwined together, ultimately related to how we value and count disease states, and ultimately affecting access to new medicines.
Thanks, Hal. And Richard, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. You've worked so diligently with FDA and with the NIH and the Scientific Registry of Transplant Recipients. The work that you've done to elevate patient insight data and lived experiences over the past 10 years. Can you tell folks about that and how that stands almost in stark contrast to this effort to now start using rudimentary economic models to limit access? I think you're seeing that even better,
Yes,
the amount of work that you and AAKP have done.
Yes, certainly, Paul. If we start with NIH over NIDDK, myself, you, several others within AAKP have been involved in their Kidney Precision Medicine Project, KPMP, which is really rewriting the books in terms of how kidney disease, and I want to emphasize kidney diseases are diagnosed, and looking at providing more specific information at the genetic level so that we can better treat this disease. And the significance of what we're doing and how we're doing it is that the leadership over there, it's great leadership, Dr. Starr, Jonathan Hebefob, who has the project up, have really brought patients in at the beginning. As a matter of fact, you and I were involved in it as they were formulating how they were going to bring this together. We went to a meeting and let them know that patients were certainly would be encouraged to give the support and effort that was needed to have the biopsies done, which is really a sacrifice, really for the sake of benefiting patients in the future. And we've been involved in many other activities over at NIH. Right now, as a matter of fact, myself representing AAKP is serving on the COVID-19 clinical guidelines treatment panel. We're still doing work over there. And one of the things I said during the interview was I was appalled at the lack of focus for this underserved community that was left out there with no information, no remedies as COVID evolved. And so there's a lot of emphasis being put on that now. And our role sitting at the table is to give them input from a patient perspective. Over working with the folks over at the SRT, the Scientific Transplant Registry, which is a tremendous organization that keeps the data on the types of transplants that are done, the numbers, the different transplant organizations. And again, the importance here is that as we shift to a value-based care environment, prevention and slowing down the progression is being highlighted, as well as increasing the number of transplants, and not just increasing the number of transplants, but trying to make certain that the patients can hold on to those kidneys longer. Hence enters the need for better medication, innovation, and if we can't get these things taken care of because of the limits or the barriers that are placed through ICER is just pervasive. It goes throughout the healthcare industry, and as individual areas, it impacts it, and then from a macro perspective, it impacts it. So our strategy at AAKP has been to have that seat at the table and bring others in to amplify our voice. Excuse me there. And we've done a great job, but you know what? We have a lot more to do. And that's why we're here working with our allies and sharing information out there with the folks who are listening in so that they can be educated and motivated to move forward. So I'll stop there, Paul, because I can go on forever because, quite frankly, AAKP has had a rich history and been at the table. The leadership has been at the table with many of these organizations that a lot of folks don't even know that they exist.
Yeah, no, Richard, actually, the thing I love about you is you never hold back either at the table or offline. So, no, you have a lot to say, and it's important for people to hear it. And that's why your value on here is so important for people to understand. Let me go back over to Al. And Al, what Richard Knight's outlining is this. Over the past 10 years, we've had organizations like the US FDA and the National Institutes of Health, NIDDK, our kidney team over there. What they've done is they've actually called this the science of patient insight data. And in particular, the FDA on the device side has encouraged companies to work closely with patients at the front end of product development and at the front end of the product development life cycle, elevating the importance of patient insight data and elevating the lived experiences of patients. And so it is a true contrast to this concept of devaluing those who have chronic disease. And I wanted you to talk about what it's like to develop products with that front end high value patient insight data and lived experiences as a company. I think it's important for people to understand what a huge shift there has been in that direction.
Thank you for that question, Paul. Yeah, we put patients first at Vera, and so I'm not sure how unique this is actually, but we ensure that we hear the patient voice before we develop the different phases of our clinical trials. So as one example, before we initiated our pivotal phase 3 last month, we had the wonderful opportunity to hear the perspective of patients, but also have them help review our trial protocol just to make sure that it lined up with their experiences. And we wanted to make sure that their suggestions were incorporated into the trial so that we can have the best possible benefit for patients when the medicine is approved. So, hearing news like that is fantastic. I think that lines up really nicely with our general approach to developing medicines. Again, I can only speak for what we do at Vera Therapeutics, but that's critically important. And, just to tag on at the end too, I realized I didn't fully answer your last question. I think, impeding medicines overall, due to access and the way that we are counting and undervaluing patient lives certainly would have an impact to pipelines overall. So it takes a tremendous amount of resources to develop one new therapeutics, and also a long time to eventually get FDA and EMA approvals. And so seeing that impediment to patient access ultimately will have ramifications as well to new drug development. So this is a very important issue.
Thanks, Al. Let me go back over to Josie. And Josie, here's a question for you that I think is important for people to understand. So when you have a lot of different organizations that are in a space and they've been able to do effective grassroots activity and elevate an issue to a piece of legislation, can you talk about the importance of ongoing collaborations with organizations and in coalitions that are beyond a specific disease group, much the way that you have done? You've done it with us on issues of gout, but that approach to widespread and broad-based collaborations, the importance of that.
Absolutely. Coalition building is really important in the public policy sphere, because that not every group is going to have 100% of their time to dedicate to the QALY or one issue or another. But most groups, Paul, I know you mentioned earlier that more than 150 groups have been a part of this effort. Every group almost has a stake in this, and so it's really critical that groups, that physicians from all specialties, that patients dealing with a range of diseases unite around this legislation and around this issue. We can't all do everything, but we all have a role that we can play, whether that is signing onto a letter or putting up an action alert or putting this on the agenda for a Capitol Hill visit. It is important that policymakers understand that this is not just a kidney disease issue, not just a Alzheimer's issue or whatever it might be. This is an issue that has broad impact across dozens of disease areas, patients young and old. This is really impactful to the wide community. And so we would just, I think, encourage folks to come together to do, whatever you can do, whether it's a little bit or a lot, because it's important that folks understand how impactful this issue is to the broad patient advocacy community. And so coming together through coalition work can be really powerful in moving the needle with policymakers and putting pressure on them too, making it clear that it's needed for them to engage, that they're going to be asked to engage, that they're going to be held accountable, on this by their constituents. And so would encourage folks to just get involved however you possibly can.
Thanks, Josie. Our president, Ed Hickey, has a saying, which is set a high mark and hold everybody accountable to it. And at AAKP, we've developed some very unique tools for patients in our organization to do exactly that for both elected leaders and appointed leaders here in Washington, D.C., in the Congress and in the executive branch and across the country. I'd like to go over to Adina real quick. And Adina, you've provided a fantastic resource for folks to be able to use after this panel. I was wondering if you could talk about the video and what the impact of that is and kind of the genesis of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So the video came out of, the understanding that these issues that we're talking about today are wonky and often not on the radar of the average person, because the sort of argument of here's this metric, this sort of mathematical tool that some policymakers are using to here's how it actually impacts you. It's kind of, I think we've done a really good job today of emphasizing that, but it is kind of a 1-2 step process, right? How do we get from A to B, A to C, really? And so this video came out of the understanding that, if we have 3 minutes with somebody, and that's probably, for the average person, that's probably optimistic, right? That we get 3 minutes with them. What do we want to say that will make them understand exactly how this applies to them, what it will make a difference in their lives, and sort of how it's being used and what they can do to take action. And I think Josie did a really great job of emphasizing the need to take action, right? Policymakers, they can hear from lobbyists or people in government affairs all day, but what they really care about is their constituency. They want to help the people that they work for. And so hearing from those people is so important. And so this video is a 3-minute sort of primer both on, what this is and why it matters not just to you, to me, but to everyone across disease states and across, anybody can engage on this issue, and anybody can figure out sort of why they care and where they are in it. And the video also, I know that you all are providing a lot of really wonderful tools on how to engage in this issue. We also have a sort of grassroots campaign tool. I also want to point everyone to, just to get involved, if this issue is really interesting to you, we have a whole website called iserfacts.org, which just sort of lays out this issue and does some explaining there. So if you're interested in learning more after this panel, I'd recommend that you check that out as a resource.
Great. Thank you very much, Adina. And Richard, I want to come back over to you before I wrap this. And for the folks that are watching, they take a look at the links. What's the one thing that you would tell them based on your experience, Richard, what they ought to do during the break and throughout the day?
Well, that's easy, Paul. I've looked at the video and I've gone to iserfacts.org. The key to all of this is education. There's nothing more powerful than an educated patient. And the resources that we're providing you really complement this panel today and provide you additional information and the background information. And I think the resources that are there explain what ICER is, their approach, so that you'll have a good idea. And for many of us, I've been using Medicare for about 5 years now. This is very real. This is very real. There are many things that simply are not covered sufficiently. And of course, the individual providers, the pharmacists and all that, they don't really know. But it's the policymakers So we have to be educated so that we can clearly articulate, and I'm going to be nice about it, but we need to demand better, because we can have a much better quality of life, all of us, but we have to make it a priority, and we have to make certain that the leadership understands the priority. So again, Paul, let me just sum it up. Education. Look at the material, follow the action steps. We don't have to be real smart. I can do it, so I know you can do it. And many of you may have never contracted your congressman. I used to work I was legislative director for a congressman. And one thing they can do is they can count. They can count letters that are sent to them. They can count emails that they receive. And if you have a large enough surge, it can cause them to move towards some type of action. And that's our objective, to make them move towards action.
Well, I tell you what, Richard, that's something that you and Ed Hickey have in common, which is the call to action. And so as we wrap up this panel, I'd like to thank all of our guests because you've heard a patient perspective, you've heard a coalition perspective, you've heard an industry perspective, and you've heard our history on this issue. And let me be perfectly clear about this. AAKP brought this issue to the forefront in 2018 because we were driving for change with the kidney community for greater innovations to extend the lives of kidney patients, to stop kidney disease, and to create cures. But if we're ever going to reach cures, we need to remove the barriers, and we need to remove the strategic barriers. And quality-adjusted life years and the actions of ICER are one of those barriers. You know, it's very easy to talk about innovation, but it's harder to talk about issues of payment and other areas that stop innovation from getting into the marketplace. And this is one thing that AAKP does. We are very good at identifying the entire spectrum of what it takes to get new therapies and new devices into the space so patients and the doctors they choose can align the right treatment at the right time to what their needs are, so they can live their lives and pursue their aspirations as they define it, not a small group of health economists in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to more discussion and your support of HR 485.